Hello and welcome to another episode of Conversing on Africa's Peace, a monthly podcast focused on the African Union's Peace and Security Council and key related issues. Produced as a collaboration between the Australian Embassy here in Addis Ababa and Amani Africa Research and Media Services. My name is Adam and I'm very pleased to be here with you for this month's edition. And of course, I'm also very pleased to be joined by two of Amani's best and brightest, Betania Tedesse and Sion Hagos. Welcome to you both, Betania and Sion.
Thank you, Adam.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
So, welcome to our listeners as well, old and new. Hopefully, let's dive straight into it. As always, we take a look back at last month for a few minutes and the PSC's agenda. So, we're looking at June, as a lot of important topics were covered last month while Zimbabwe was in the chair. I had a quick look and reminded myself about last month's program of work, and we can observe that there was quite a bit of focus on ATMIS, the peacekeeping operation in Somalia. I recall an update on the sort of ever-fragile peace and security situation in the Central African Republic, and a really interesting briefing and discussion on the situation in the Horn of Africa, which touched on the ongoing conflict in Sudan, amongst other issues. Some other important sessions included consideration of the AU Sanctions Committee, relations between the Peace and Security Council and the UN African members, or the A3, and continental security policy sort of focused on the African Standby Force. So if I can start with you, Betania. From your perspective, or from Amani's perspective, what were some of the key takeaways from all of these important agenda items for you?
Thank you so much, Adam, for welcoming us again this month to also discuss what transpired over the previous month, which it's ending today, the month of June, under the chairship of Zimbabwe within the Peace and Security Council. So as you've summarized the various agenda items, there were a number of issues, very interesting issues, both on the conflict situations from the country, region-specific, but also thematic issues that have been discussed by the PSC. But one issue that was also very timely, I think, for the PSC was the ministerial session that took place, specifically focusing on the operationalization of the African Standby Force.
Yeah.
So I think that the fact that it was also held at the ministerial level was a demonstration of how also Zimbabwe particularly views and values this particular agenda, and it's also very timely because it also it connects with the ongoing discussion on peace support operation, on how to really respond to the insecurity across the continent. So this was one of the agenda items that's it's very important, but has not quite been dealt with adequately. The last time that was discussed was back in March 2022. And even during that time, the PSC, of course, discussed a lot of the challenges that the African Standby Force is confronted with, particularly in the operationalization, why it's not being properly deployed.
Right.
And why it's not being utilized given the kind of security response needs that the continent has. This also came up during the inaugural Lessons Learned forum that was held in Abuja again late last year.
Yeah.
And also the PSC, of course, recognized when it was considering the conclusions of that particular forum, it also made a particular decision which instructed that any kind of deployment of peace support operations has to be taken within the framework of the African Standby Force.
Yeah.
This is also, again, a recognition of, there is this increasing trend, as we've seen in the past years, where a lot of deployments are taking place at ad hoc level, which really fractures the collective security mechanism. So it's also to really respond to that challenge, the importance of aligning. It's also very much important for coordination purposes to deploy any kind of forces within this framework of a continental framework. So it's the African Standby Force remains very much relevant, but it's also important to align, to reconcile the conceptual aspect of ASF with the current realities or security needs, right? So it's I think it's something that also requires a bit of further work in that regard. But we've also seen that some practical steps that have been taken, particularly on the division of labor aspect between the African Union and the regional economic communities, which are the main actors actually in the operationalization of the African Standby Force. So we have a draft MOU that was agreed in May this year. So, but eventually it also, it's a matter of commitment and political will, both from the African Union side, but also from the regional economic community side, particularly in enhancing the capability aspect as well.
Yeah, no, very good points. Just quickly on the briefing on the situation in the Horn of Africa, it's an ambitious meeting because we've got like 4+ kind of conflicts or recent conflicts to be discussed. I think from memory, the recent conflict in northern Ethiopia was discussed, Somalia, South Sudan, and of course the ongoing conflict in Sudan. I just am interested in the Sudan item on that agenda. There seems to be some efforts to align the various sort of mediation efforts, and it's, as a sort of outside observer, it seems a little bit complicated and perhaps confusing, but I think there's a lot of goodwill between the African Union and IGAD, at least, to better coordinate. But unfortunately, it seems the parties to the conflict aren't at that point where they want to negotiate necessarily. We've had these sort of humanitarian ceasefires, which have been sort of somewhat patchy. I wasn't in the room. I don't know whether there was anything that particularly stood out for you on that situation in the Horn of Africa item, or anything you have to say on that would be really interesting.
Yeah, actually, you're right, Adam. That was one of those very interesting sessions that happened during that month. The Horn of Africa, like having this comprehensive kind of overview, because each of these countries have their own kind of internal security dynamics and political developments taking place, but there is also the regional aspect, which the crisis and conflict of one country is affecting the other. So many of these countries are in a very fragile as well security situation. So it was good for the PSC to also consider more broadly the security situation in the Horn of Africa. But I think what was kind of, that's something that could have been further enhanced in the discussion, but also in the outcome document, is to see to what extent, for example, the current crisis in Sudan is also affecting the other neighboring countries, both, of course, in the Horn region, but as you may know, the situation in Sudan is not only affecting the Horn, but other regions as well, broadly, the Central Africa region, but also the Sahel region. So a lot of countries are affected by the crisis in Sudan. So it would have been very interesting to also see to what extent, the PSC is also reflecting on that particular impact, the broader impact of the crisis in Sudan. Because if you see in the outcome document, you see that there is a lot of a discussion on the individual kind of countries. I talked about, of course, on the peace agreement implementation in Ethiopia, talked about the transitional phase, some of the pending issues that are still that still need to be completed, for example, in South Sudan. It also talked about the whole transition process in Somalia, particularly the withdrawal of troops, which is taking place as we speak.
Indeed.
But of course, it also made reference to the security and humanitarian challenges in Sudan, and of course the diplomatic efforts, endorsing the decision of IGAD. But again, as you can imagine, for example, what's happening in Sudan has a direct impact on South Sudan, for example.
Absolutely.
Not just from the humanitarian security situation, but also from economic factors as well. So there is a lot to be unpacked, I think.
Yeah, when I read the communique that came out of that session, I couldn't help but think, if anybody was new to the work of the PSC, they could have a look at that and get a sense of the plethora of issues, interlocked and overlapping issues that face the the Peace and Security Council on any given month. And I think you're right to say that it just shows how complex and interlocked so many of these issues are. So, kudos, I guess, to Zimbabwe and the other members for embracing with those country-related issues. Okay, thanks for those insights, Betania. Let's have a look at July. Senegal will take the chair of the Peace and Security Council for the month of July 2023. And while many of us here in increasingly rainy Addis Ababa might be starting to think about school holidays, like I was talking about with you just before, or things like that, obviously the important work of the Peace and Security Council continues. Once again, the provisional program of work that's come out, Amani has analysed it and brought to our attention that it includes 4 substantive sessions. One of the sessions will address country or regional specific issues, while the remaining 3 will cover thematic issues or topics. All of the sessions will be in person except one online session, which is due to be held at ministerial level. We also anticipate, if my understanding is correct, a field mission to the Sahel. So let's start with the 6th of July, when the PSC will come together for a consultative meeting with civil society organisations and the Economic, Social and Cultural Committee, or ECOSOC. This is the second such meeting, Sion, with the first being last September. Tell me a bit more about what this meeting is going to be about, please.
All right, Adam. So, like you just mentioned, this will be the second time the PSC will be holding this consultative meeting with CSOs and ECOSOC. Just to highlight first what the outcomes of the first meeting were, because this is really important. The first critical point was the recognition that the PSC made in terms of the role that CSOs play in advancing AU agendas. So, be it Agenda 2063 or silencing the guns, this was one critical aspect of the outcome of that meeting. Another critical aspect was, again, the acknowledgement of the contribution that CSOs make in terms of bridging the gap between the policy space and public space or citizens. Yeah. So aside from this, it was also important in serving towards institutionalizing this consultative meeting between CSOs and the PSC.
Right.
So as you may imagine, Adam, although CSOs have somewhat actively been engaging in AU's peace and security and also governance-related work within the framework of the Livingston and Maseru conclusions, the creation of this platform now, which caters for a direct engagement between the Peace and Security Council and representatives from CSOs, is really a very critical point or a very critical advancement towards ensuring this bridging of gap between policy space and the public space, like I mentioned earlier. So one critical progress that has been made really in this respect has been this effort that has been deployed by ECOSOC to develop a database of CSOs. So this database is basically aimed to collate a list of CSOs that can be mobilized towards implementing AU decisions and instruments on peace and security, as well as on democratic governance. Continent-wide, okay. Definitely. And also, it's based on this list that the PSC intends to engage CSOs. It could be through invitation on its various sessions dedicated to different peace and security council, peace and security related agenda items. Yeah. So one critical aspect of follow-up for the coming session would really be to see where ECOSOC has reached with respect to developing or finalizing the development of this database.
Okay.
And it has been holding different consultations with CSOs to see their inputs to the development of this database. So that would be an interesting aspect to look forward to. Yeah.
Okay, that is really interesting, and I think it's a sort of innovative, sort of novel approach. So we'll watch that item with interest. Now, we need to remember that the AU mid-year coordination meetings of the Executive Council and the regional economic communities and mechanisms take place the week commencing 10 July in Nairobi, which means that many members of the PSC will be occupied. Therefore, the PSC takes a break until the 21st of July. And when on the 21st of July business starts up again, there is scheduled to be a specific session on the situation in the Sahel. Sion, once again to you, what can we expect to be discussed? I mean, I would imagine Mali will be high on the agenda one way or the other, but what else do you expect?
The Sahel region, as we are all observing, it's continuing to experience security threats, particularly manifesting in the form of terrorism, of course. But also at the same time, we see that a number of countries in the region are also facing complex political transitions.
Indeed.
And then again, this is compounded not only by the security and humanitarian situation, but also the overall socio-economic landscape of the region. Yeah. So, like you mentioned, Mali definitely is expected to be high on the agenda, but also Burkina Faso, I would imagine, is another country that needs to be that needs to take up the council's attention. Yeah. So, just to highlight some of the main aspects of the situation in these two countries, in Mali, we have seen in recent months intensified operation by terrorist groups, particularly the ISGAs, the Islamic State in Greater Sahara, which has been able to take control of territories in regions near to Mali's borders with Niger and Burkina Faso, very critical areas. So it is clear that despite this strengthened offensive by Malian forces, and also in spite of the support that is provided by Russia now through the security cooperation deal between the two countries, it seems like the security situation only continues to deteriorate. Now again, with MINUSMA's planned withdrawal, which is just today on the agenda for vote by the UN Security Council, we can imagine that there's going to be a huge security vacuum, which is one issue of great concern for the PSC to reflect on. Yeah. So this development, particularly what it means for the PSC and also for the AU at large, is that this particular development signifies the need, to reflect on where things stand with the deployment of the 3,000 troops to the Sahel.
Right.
The decision was made by the Assembly back in 2020, but the PSC has also endorsed that decision in its previous session, but there really hasn't been much progress in terms of implementation. And yes, of course, there is a lot of challenge in terms of implementing this decision, but now seeing the development with MINUSMA, I think now would be the right time for the AU to reflect on how to really now address this challenge.
Yeah, no, really interesting and complex issues that just sort of keep evolving and kind of dodging any kind of easy solutions. But yeah, we'll watch that session with interest.
I mean, there's also, of course, the political transition aspect that is not to be forgotten.
Right.
And we have seen the recent referendum in Mali.
Yeah.
And the turnout, which has basically approved the amendment of the constitution. But what does this really mean? Because we have seen opposition parties coming out and saying that the amendment allows a lot of power to the president. And then we have also seen that the voter turnout was not quite as expected. It didn't even approach to 50% of the population. So this might actually create some tension going forward. So that's definitely something to look out for as well.
Indeed, I agree. Okay. Already somehow we're at the 25th of July due to this sort of lighter but no less important month. At the Peace and Security Council. 25th of July, there is a ministerial level session devoted to an interesting topic, I think, community level responses to Africa's security challenges. What exactly is this about and what is the session designed to achieve?
So this session basically, the theme itself, it's featuring on the PSC's agenda for the first time. But it's featuring on the agenda for a reason. having regard to developments on the ground, of course. So it's basically expected to reflect on the increasing proliferation of self-defense groups
Right.
in various parts of the continent, where civilian populations are now taking up arms and they are compelled to respond to security threats on the ground that are
Yeah.
not being effectively resolved. Yeah.
Mhm.
So for the PSC and also other relevant policy organs at the regional and continental level, this is clearly a concern that requires timely attention and response. And part of this really is identifying the underlying factors or the underlying reasons that are generating this sort of citizen or civilian mobilization.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic, and it sort of touches on so many things that I know Amani's worked on in the past, and Solomon's always talking about the need to reframe what drives terrorism and how the state or individuals or community groups can counter that drive towards extremism. And I think whatever's discussed in that ministerial session will be really interesting, and we look forward. I mean, are we expecting a communique or some kind of document to come out of that meeting? That would normally be the case, I guess.
Yes, I like either a press statement or a communique.
Right, okay.
International.
Well, I'll keep an eye out for that one. Okay, the final session of the month is due to be held on the 31st of July, which I guess sort of touches on one or two of the things that we've talked about already, but the mid-year report of the Chairperson of Commission on Elections in Africa, always really topical. There always seem to be really important member state elections either on the horizon or ones which we're sort of analysing the fallout from or what have you here in Africa. What is the role of the Peace and Security Council in these elections, and what sort of things does the mid-year report cover?
Yeah, so just directly to reflect on the question you raised on PSC's role in elections, one aspect you could look at it from is now these reports enable the PSC to take it could be preventive action,
Right.
it could be the deployment of preventive diplomacy in member states that are now observed as risky,
Yeah.
where there are some tension around election times. So yeah, definitely. But aside from that, it is also an opportunity to learn from previous elections, isn't it? Because the report captures not just predictions or an outlook for coming elections, but also those that took place.
Yeah.
So, for instance, at the upcoming one, you can expect to hear about how the election in Nigeria went,
Yeah.
how the election in just previously in Sierra Leone,
Yes.
what were some of the defining features of these elections.
Right.
And also, of course, coming ones, interesting ones like the one in Zimbabwe, the one in CAR at the local level. Is it
Yes.
really going to happen within this
I
one?
know, yeah.
These are some of the interesting ones we need to look at for you.
Okay. So I just wanted to give Britannia the chance to chime in again here as we look at the last month and this month ahead. Have I missed anything, Britannia, or is there anything else that you'd like to bring to our listeners' attention?
So maybe if I can just speak very briefly on some of Amani Africa's products that we've released. Of course, we talk about insights. In this podcast, we talk about the monthly program of work.
Yeah.
But in our work, we also try to expand our various research work, particularly on Ideas in Daba, which will really provide very interesting analysis on current issues. Our latest Ideas in Daba looked at the situation in Darfur because we really wanted to bring out particularly the challenges that that particular region within Sudan is facing in the ongoing crisis. But another interesting publication we've released is a policy brief in relation to the new agenda for peace, which also provides an African perspective in terms of contributing to this global and multilateral kind of agenda. And we also provide very timely kind of analysis on how to shape this agenda. particularly in terms of reforming this multilateral order, because at the moment the way we are seeing with the increasing confrontation among superpowers and conflicts and are becoming much more violent, are becoming much more protracted. So there is a need to really recalibrate, and there's also a need to really rethink on our approach towards diplomacy and conflict management. And as Amani Africa, we really made this contribution to also provide, a regional perspective, an African perspective in shaping this global agenda. And it also, I think the new agenda for peace also provides an opportunity for the world really to reflect on how the diplomacy and conflict management aspect can be further refined to respond to this violent conflicts we are seeing emerging, and Africa is really paying the highest price.
Good points, well made. And I'm always amazed at the amount and quality of content that comes out from Amani Africa. You mustn't sleep. There's so much really good, insightful analysis, and I commend you for that work, and it's great to be one of your partners. Okay, that brings us nearly to the end of another episode. We wish Senegal well as it chairs the PSC for July, and we wish everyone taking part in the work of the PSC productive discussions on the important topics outlined briefly here today. The work of the PSC is so important, and we here at Conversing on Africa's Peace are always keen to do our little bit to spread the word about what it does. As Britannia just mentioned, I'd really encourage people to dig a bit deeper into the PSC's agenda by accessing Amani's range of analytical products. The Australian Embassy is particularly pleased to be supporting the insights on the Peace and Security Council, the analysis of the provisional PSC work each month, and we hope that this podcast is a useful accompaniment to that work. Britannia and Sion, thanks for joining me once again. Always a pleasure. And if my calculations are correct, next month will mark 1 year of the Conversing on Africa's Peace podcast. So I'm really looking forward to marking that milestone with you and our listeners. Before we go, as usual, we'd like to wish the following African states happy National Month, or days rather, of celebration in July. July looks like a popular month. We have Burundi, Rwanda and Somalia on the 1st of July, Algeria and Cape Verde on the 5th, the Comoros and Malawi on the 6th, Sao Tome and Principe on the 12th of July, and Liberia on the 26th of July. We wish you all peace and prosperity.
Thank you for joining us for this month Conversing on Africa's Peace podcast, which is a collaboration between Amani Africa and the Australian Embassy in Addis Ababa. We hope you have a great month, and we'll be back next month to consider the PSC's agenda for August. Thank you.